I am so excited to be here today. My name is Jessica Palais, and I am the Senior Director of Marketing and Communications here at Vivi. And I also lead Vivi's family experience. I am also a mom of two, and I am, like many of you, still struggling, constantly struggling with screen time with my own children. So this is a really exciting opportunity to chat about a topic that I care deeply about. I am very excited to be joined today by Dr. Kristyn VanDahm, a child developmental psychologist who specializes in parenting, child development, and parent-child relationships. She's going to help us make some sense of the research around screen time for young children, and she's going to share advice on developing the right strategy for your child and your family around screen time, while also taking into account the reality of what it is like to be a parent in this world today. I also just wanted to quickly introduce our partner on today's webinar, Maka Kids, and Dr. VanDahm serves as the Director of Research and Development there. I'm very excited to learn more about Maka Kids, but I can tell you that it is a streaming app launching this spring, and it's going to be filled with videos created specifically for children ages 0 to 5. The content was created with children's development in mind, and it's completely ad-free with no autoplay and no built-in time limits. Yes, built-in time limits, no autoplay. So at the end of the discussion, we'll invite Julia to share a little bit more and answer any questions. For those of you that are not familiar with Vivi, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what we do here. We at Vivi are on a mission to reinvent childcare and early learning for today's families. We currently have 12 campuses in and around New York, including a brand new campus on the Upper West Side. And we specialize in learning and care for children 6 weeks to 5 years old. We also partner with employers of all sizes to bring childcare to their parents as a benefit. So we here at Vivi, we absolutely believe it's our mission to support the whole family, not just your children in childcare. And that is why we do things like continuing education and resources like today's webinar. So before we get started, just sharing a couple of program logistics. I first of all just want to say thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. I know that you're busy, and we appreciate you carving out a little bit of time in your day. We have about 45 minutes together. So Kristyn's going to use the first 30 minutes or so to run through a presentation and do a little Q&A. And then we want to hear from you. So please drop your questions into the chat, anything that's on your mind. We'd love to get to it. And finally, I want to acknowledge that this is a huge topic and just growing. So even if we don't get to everything today, my goal is to hopefully send you all home with at least one applicable tool that you can bring into your own life and make you feel a little bit more equipped to handle whatever's coming your way. So let's get started. So Kristyn, I wanted to just ground our conversation in some of the new 2026 screen time guidelines from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So they were released earlier this year, and in what came as a surprise for me, and I think some parents, they prioritize quality, context, and conversation over strict time limits. And that is something I think that feels a little new and different. They do outline age-related guidelines, including no screens for children under 18 months, and 1 hour of what they call high quality content for children daily for children ages 2 to 5. So I was surprised to see that these screen time or guidelines were less about minutes and more about how to live with screens. I think an acknowledgement that this is the reality that we're living in. So things like screens shouldn't replace screens. Screens shouldn't replace sleep. Sorry, all the EE words. Physical activity, family time, or free play. Children should have device-free bedrooms and meal times, and parents should consider co-viewing, so watching screens alongside children, talking about the content, and modeling good digital habits. So these are things that to me seem to acknowledge this reality that we're living in instead of, preaching abstinence to some extent. And I'm curious, with that as a foundation, I would love for you to kind of jump in and share, where you're coming from. Give us a little bit about who you are and what you study, and then, go ahead and jump into your presentation.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kristyn VanDahm, and as Jess said, I am a developmental psychologist. My training is primarily in early childhood, early parent-child relationships, and parenting. Yeah, so in terms of the new guidelines that you just kind of went over, I think I agree with you. I think that those guidelines have shifted from minutes because I don't think it's just about minutes anymore. And we're going to talk more about that in the presentation today. But essentially, I think it's real life happens. And as you said, screens aren't going away. It's actually really difficult to keep your child from screens completely because they're just everywhere. And I think a lot of what you mentioned has threads throughout my presentation today. So I'd love to just dive right in. And then if people have additional questions, we can go ahead and talk about those afterwards. So, thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. As I said earlier, I am a developmental psychologist and I'm MACA's Director of Research and Development. I'm also a mother of two children, ages 1 and 6. And today I'm really excited to be here to talk to you all about screen time in the early years. But I want to just highlight that we're not going to be talking about screen time in terms of strict rules or time limits, but in terms of how existing research can actually help inform the ways that we think about making decisions about our kids' screen time. If navigating screen time ever feels confusing, you're not alone. Most parents that we talk about or talk to care deeply about what their children are watching. They're paying attention, they're noticing the content, but they still feel unsure about how to best navigate screen time. Parents often hear messages like limit screen time or this show's educational, but at the same time, like I said, screens are everywhere. They're at home, they're at daycares, they're in schools, they're in waiting rooms, they're in our pockets, right? We're carrying them around with us. And the confusion around screen time isn't because parents don't care. It's because the guidance can oftentimes push up against reality. And I think, as you mentioned, that is reflected in those new, AAP previously did have those time limits and now they're shifting. And I think that is a reflection of this guidance pushes up against reality a little bit. So today's webinar isn't meant, like I said, to give you rules to put in place or to make you feel guilty or to even figure out like what the perfect amount is. It's not about teaching you how to track more or how to get it right. What it is about is to give you information that's informed by research so you can feel more confident in making thoughtful decisions for your family and for your child about screen time use. So, a little disclaimer for today, when I say screen time, I'm going to be talking about shows or media that your child views on a television, a tablet, or phone. And I just want to put this caveat in because I recognize that screen time can also be used to describe things like video calling, video games, social media, or just like exploring other apps on devices. But today I'm really going to be focusing on that content that they're viewing. And so the reason that we hear so much in the news and the media about screen time is that at a national level, screen time is rising to really high levels, even for young children. A recent WHO report reiterates that above average use of screen time for families in the US is actually happening. In the United States, around 50% of kids ages 2 to 5 years old average more than 2 hours of screen time a day. For some families, this extensive use actually underscores and highlights the broader issues around lack of childcare, decreased flexibility for working caregivers, and just some of those societal issues that make it really tough to be a parent and to parent without or with limited screens. When screen time is talked about in regards to young children, it's usually described in minutes because minutes are easy to measure and think about. And they're also easy to talk about in important spaces like clinically, like if you're at the pediatrician's office or in relation to policy. But the amount of screen time that kids watch is just one piece of a larger puzzle. And like parenting, it's not black and white. Generally, research finds that early and extensive screen time for young children has been associated with negative effects on children's executive functioning and language development. But it's important to note that these findings are correlational and not causal. And what this means is that there are likely other factors at play that are driving these associations between screen time and these negative effects, like the fact that screens can take away from other developmentally positive activities, things like reading, playing with toys, interacting with others, interacting with caregivers. And that taking away from those developmentally positive things is likely what is the mechanism that's driving those associations. Two different children can watch the same amount of screen time and have wildly different experiences and behave differently, right? This is because there are a lot of different factors that contribute to the media viewing experience. So, beyond the amount of screen time, which is just one factor, one piece of the puzzle, what else can we look at? Three important things to consider are the child, the content, and the context. And that's what we're going to talk about next. If we look to the research about quality of screen time for young children, it suggests that when we're making decisions about it, we should do our best to hold these three things in mind. The first, factors about the child. Things like where are they developmentally? A lot of times people think about that in terms of age, but it's also their abilities and their skills, their temperament or personality, how easily they're overstimulated, or basic things like what they find engaging. Other factors about the actual content. What is the actual episode or the show itself about? Is it educational or is it entertaining? What's the pacing like? What are the screen cuts, those changes that you see on the screen? How quickly it's shifting? How fast the camera's moving? What are the colors like? Are the sounds really loud and kind of surprising? And then also factors related to context. Things like what was happening earlier in the day. And this doesn't just mean like context now. Yes, it includes that. Are they watching alone? Are they watching with you? But also the broader context of what's going on in your life, right? Have there been big changes? Did you move? Is there a new sibling in the house? Is there a change in routine? Have you and your child had time to connect today? All of these contextual things also play into that experience. And so, what does it mean for you? What it means is when you're thinking about parenting related to screens, you can ask yourself these three questions on the screen. Who is my child? What are they watching? And what's going on around them? And this framework, it's not new. It's just a way of simplifying some of the research takeaways into three questions that you can use in real life to kind of anchor yourself before you're making these decisions. So the first question, who's my child? This question focuses on who your child actually is. Where are they developmentally? How old are they? And guess what? You're already doing this every single day, probably every minute you're thinking about your child. When you're thinking about what they like to play, what your child will and won't eat, right? When you're packing the diaper bag or their school backpack with all the possible things they might need to go anywhere, right? Like toys, snacks, change of clothes. You're constantly thinking about your child. And when it comes to screens, it's no different. It just means that you're considering who your child is and where they are developmentally. So you can use that information to inform your decision making, particularly around screens. But I'd argue, generally speaking, you're using that information to parent. Every child is unique, and that plays a big role in how screen time might impact them. What the research shows is for babies, particularly under 18 months old, their cognitive development isn't mature enough to actually take what they're seeing on the screen and transfer it to the real world. And this is one of the main reasons why we see recommendations for no screen time for this age group. Essentially, what it means is that children under 18 months aren't able to learn from a screen in the same way that an older child might be able to. And so that passive viewing doesn't necessarily support their development. But for toddlers and preschoolers, the literature is actually suggesting that viewing high quality content with clear educational goals is associated with higher levels of pro-social behavior and language development. For example, shows like Sesame Street that are curriculum driven and intentionally designed with clear educational goals that support specific school readiness skills that young kids might need are developmentally appropriate. And there's decades of research that's looked at specifically Sesame Street and how those outcomes are related to what the content is of the show. The next question is about what's on the screen. What is the content of the show that your child might be watching? A lot of times at face value, a lot of parents see shows that might include characters talking about letters, numbers, colors, or other kind of like academic topics. And although these shows might include these topics, they might not have those clear educational goals. And the ways that these things are presented actually matters, right? There's a difference between just counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and showing a child kind of that correspondence of like one and there's one object, or two and there's two objects, or showing how they're counting those two things. Those are different in terms of how they're being presented. And we also know that some shows move really quickly. They use really bright, flashy colors and graphics. They can be really loud or really jumpy. Whereas there are other shows that do the complete opposite. They're slow, they take really great care to move at a developmentally appropriate pace, which might look like pausing for a child to answer or giving time for them to think about a question that was asked.
Can I just jump in for a second? It's so cool that you've done this for these three shows right here that I know are very, very popular amongst parents. Is there a place where parents could go to find out more about their particular child's favorite show and really what the scene change rate is, how problems are resolved, like some of these really kind of interesting data points that you're talking about as maybe more important data points than letters, numbers, and colors?
So, to my knowledge, there isn't a place where you can go and just like look up scene changes or like cuts of a show.
Parents' opportunity there.
Yeah. To my knowledge, there isn't that currently. And in terms of, I think the other question you asked is like how problems are resolved. I think Julia is going to talk a little bit later about maca, but to my knowledge, there isn't like any go-to catalog where you can kind of like search a show and like pull out some of these factors.
I would say the closest is like a common sense media, but in deep diving into them as a parent, I've realized that a lot of it focuses on age appropriateness that is determined by other parents, and it's sort of more peer reviewed, and it's not as grounded in sort of like the child development science that Kristen's speaking about today.
Thank you. Super interesting. I'll let you keep going.
Sure. So importantly, another thing that I want to point out is learning doesn't always just come from characters teaching directly, right? ABCs, one, two, threes. Children often learn just as much from what they see modeled to them. And this is true in the real world too, right? Like your kids are constantly watching you when you accidentally like use a darn or whatever, and then they say it later and you're like, oh no, oops. Um, children, and this is especially true. The literature actually highlights that children learn, especially from characters in media that are especially meaningful to them. And so this could include how characters treat each other, how they respond to challenges, how emotions are worked through. Like my kids love my little one. He loves Elmo. Right? Like, and this was before he even started watching Elmo. He just liked that we had an Elmo doll for my daughter, and he just liked Elmo. And so the research actually shows there's a specific study I'm thinking of that, when those characters are meaningful to them, it actually pushes that lesson through more than just some random, character that they've never seen before. And high quality programming doesn't just include those that focus on academics. I don't want to just say like educational content is the only thing, right? There's other ways that shows can promote positive, developmentally supportive things. And so there are shows that also seek to promote social emotional learning, right? These shows might highlight characters experiencing a range of emotions, both negative emotions and positive emotions. They might model positive social relationships or show a way how to navigate conflict or repair, right? These are modeling different ways that relationships, positive relationships, can kind of unravel. And it's nice for kids to be able to see those, especially if they're not necessarily seeing it in real life. It might be like a precursor to experiencing that in real life with friends or peers. Okay, the third question focuses on the context, as I mentioned earlier. So what's happening around the screen? Context, if you ask me as a psychologist, context is really important in everything that you're thinking about, right? So taking something and putting it in a vacuum doesn't really give you the real story. Are kids watching screens so you can get a moment to make dinner? Are screens helping to, either work through a transition or to prepare a child for a transition? Or is it family movie night? There are different circumstances when screens are used, and it depends. So for young children, joining your child in viewing, as you mentioned, Jess, or co-viewing can really help turn that screen time into a developmentally beneficial moment. And I think it's not just necessarily sitting there and watching with them. It's engaging, right? It's engaging and turning that into a moment of connection. So labeling an emotion that you might see a character experience, or asking a follow-up question, like, how do you think so and so feels? And it might transform that interaction with the screen into a learning moment or that connection moment. Other things could be like bringing up the plot of a show after you've watched something together, and that facilitating some kind of bonding moment. A 2024 meta-analysis, which is just a fancy word for saying a research study that combined lots of data from different studies that were similar, found that co-viewing had a small positive effect on children's learning. And this is likely because parents are able to scaffold children's learning by taking what they're seeing on a screen and integrating it and incorporating the child or the parent's real life experiences to kind of bring that lesson or moment to life for that child. And so I recognize as parents, as working parents, we might not always, or even as not working parents, we might not always have time or the opportunity to co-view and to sit and engage with our child. And that's okay too, right? Engaging with your child about what they saw on a screen doesn't mean that you're always watching with them. A term in the literature, joint media engagement, or using media to engage in activities together, like playing, reading, or creating, including viewing, can be beneficial for parent-child interactions too. So, what does this look like? It could look like asking a question at dinner after they watched a show, or joining them in play that was inspired by a show. My daughter, I mean, Frozen was pretty popular with a lot of little girls, but my daughter would always like pretend to say, she'd sing and we'd play like the soundtrack from Frozen, and I would just engage. I of course was always Anna because I wasn't good enough to be Elsa and she was Elsa. So, it's just like moments like that, engaging, and it extends kind of that moment, and what kids are getting from the screen.
I love this advice that you're giving because I think as adults, like we often watch TV or watch screens very passively. And this is a really different way of thinking about engaging while you're using a screen or after the screen. And I think it takes practice. It definitely is something I'm going to go home and like give a try, But I think the encouragement and kind of the how to is really valuable because it's not the way that we typically, as adults, I think, use screens.
And I will say, as an adult, it's okay to need to check out sometimes, like they're generally speaking, yes, like this heavy use isn't great for anyone, for adults or kids, but using it as an outlet sometimes to get some stress relief or connect with others, that's okay, as long as it doesn't become this consistent thing that takes away from those supportive interactions. Okay. So in real life, as you just mentioned, there are reasons why we use screen time, and they can look really different. Family movie nights, preparing for a transition or just having fun, right? Like that's okay too. Kids can have fun. As long as you're okay with your kids having fun. At our house, just a personal kind of example, at our house, my 6-year-old, she gets like 30 minutes to an hour of screen time every day after school. And this is because I realized when she was in preschool, I would drive home, I would pick her up and I'd drive home and she'd say, "Don't talk to me." And I realized what she was doing is she just needed this time to decompress after she's been listening, learning, playing, engaging all day. And if I gave her that time, so we would drive home, I'd let her turn on a show. After the show's over, she doesn't melt down. She just jumps right in, starts playing with her stuff. We turn off the TV and she goes and she does her thing. And I realized that much like how I act, and I'm sure, Jess, it sounds like you do too, like at the end of the day, and when you wanted to read a book, right? Like it's their way, my child. It was my child's way of telling me that she just needed some time. And then if she got that time, she could jump right back into it. And actually, it's become part of her routine. So she knows, like, she'll say, "Can I watch another one?" And I'll ask her, like, "How many have you watched?" Well, two's our limit. And she'll say, "I'm on number two." And I'll say, "Okay, well, when this is over, we're turning it off." And obviously, it doesn't always go well, but more times than not, she's like, "Okay," because she knows. And on the weekends, she actually continues this, watching her 30 minutes to an hour of a show while my 1-year-old's napping. My 1-year-old, I don't give him, this is my preference, I don't give him a show every day. Obviously, sometimes I can't help it. There might be something on, but I try to minimize that. Like I'll take him into another room or play with him elsewhere or let her watch while he's napping. And this gives her a chance to kind of keep that as part of her routine, watch a show she enjoys, and gives me the opportunity to, if I feel up for it, to co-view or take a breather because my other one's sleeping and sometimes I'm exhausted and I just need a break.
Yeah. This is actually a great time, I think, to ask. There's a question in the chat that I know you can't see, but a parent has a question about tagging along. So viewing, she has a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old, so similar to your age spread. And she says she tries not to have the 1-year-old watch, but the 5-year-old's watching, and sometimes
Uh-oh.
it's not always possible to separate them.
Oh, I'm sorry, you froze. Sorry, can you
Oh,
re
I'm so sorry. So I'm just going to repeat that. So this person in the chat has a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old, and the general kind of gist of the question is she can't always separate them. Is it a problem if they're co-viewing? And what's your advice about trying to separate them, and how important is that?
So, I mean, I think this is parenting advice, and I will just give the disclaimer that I think parenting is unique to the child and it's unique to who you are, and we all have kind of different views on this. So, I think that is where we start. But in terms of like, is this bad for him? I mean, I think, like I had mentioned before, what we want to ensure is that screen time isn't taking away consistently from these developmentally supportive interactions. If it's 5 hours a day, yeah, that's probably not great. But if it's so you can cook dinner, because I do this, like I have to cook dinner. Either someone's not eating or they have to figure it out for a few minutes. And it's not the whole picture, right? I think it's important as parents to remember that like screen time, if we're not using it heavily, it's just a small part of your whole entire relationship, your whole family environment. And so remembering that the relationships that you have with your child and that your child has with their sibling, those take precedence over these small moments of like an hour of TV, right? And I think as much as you can, like for me, I prefer to separate them if I can. I can't always separate them. And to be honest with you, he's almost two, but my 1-year-old, he'll say, watch, which is watch. And I'll say, no, we're not going to watch right now, right? Like, you don't need to watch, we'll go play. And honestly, when he is watching, when she's watching, he watches for 2 minutes and then he's off doing his own thing. So, I don't think that necessarily gives you a direct answer, but I think it's good to anchor ourselves in they're still developing in the context of relationships and in a home that is far greater. They're taking away much more from that than they are from this small aspect. It's one aspect of your whole life, right?
I don't know if this is a little bit kind of, additional on Grace's question, but what about the content piece of that? I mean, you talked really about kind of the timing piece of it, of, maybe the child's only going to be in front of the screen for 2 minutes before he wanders away. And you also mentioned that kids under 18 months are not taking away anything that they're developmentally like learning from, which is one of the reasons you don't want to put them in front of a screen under 18 months. But is there any danger of him watching something, or your 1 year old watching something that a 5 year old would be watching, and maybe getting a negative impact because of that, because of the content that the 5 year old might be viewing?
I mean, I think it depends on what the content is, right? Like if they're watching the news, probably because it's n not developmentally appropriate at all. I know in those situations for me, I'll usually turn on something that's appropriate for both of them as much as I can. There's not a ton, but like my daughter, if I'm turning on Sesame Street, she'll complain, but then she'll be like glued to it. So I try, I think finding something that's developmentally appropriate within means for both of them is probably the best way to go about that. But yeah, I mean, it depends on the content. Like if they're watching a PG-13 movie, it's probably not great because it's modeling things that my guess is you don't want them to watch. But if you don't want them to watch it, you're probably not turning on a PG-13 movie, right? I think it's important, like everyone that's here that wants to listen to this, I think you guys, we're already self-selecting yourselves, right? Because you're choosing to come to something like this and you want to be aware and you want to know the research. And I think you need to remind yourself that like you're doing a good job. You're curious and you're wanting to do better, but not so much to the point where like it makes you feel so guilty and stressed out that it takes away from your ability to like really engage and like be there for your kids.
Thank you. And thanks, Grace, for chiming in the chat. If you have questions, please feel free to throw them into the chat and we will either pick them up as we go or we'll get to them towards the end. Thanks.
Yeah. So, in the context of everything that we've discussed here, knowing your child, ensuring or thinking about the content that they're watching and trying your best to make it high quality content and what's going on around them, you know, it's okay if fun is one of the reasons why you want to let them have some screen time, right? It's about that consistency. It's about it, if you're making that heavy use, if that heavy use is what's happening, it's probably going to be contributing to some of the effects, right? But if it's just a one-off, it's just a little bit of time. Like I think try to give yourself some grace and understand that you're being stretched in many different directions, and screen time can be a tool. And so research, generally speaking, supports that for kids, 2 and up. Using it in moderation, if it aligns with your parenting and doesn't consistently take away from those opportunities for your child to engage in those developmentally supportive activities, then great. Like, that's it, right? Like, it's okay. All right. So, to wrap it all up, when figuring out screen time feels really overwhelming, it can really help to anchor yourself into these questions to just give yourself a little bit more information to make those decisions. Who is my child? What are they watching? What's going on around them in the context of the screen, both literally right now and generally speaking, right? In your life. And the answers to these questions can be really useful as you're trying to make these decisions and navigate these things, right? So, final takeaway I'd like to share is that with regard to screen time, keeping that moderation and asking yourself these questions, remembering that consistently, if they're still able to engage in these developmentally supportive opportunities, a little here and there, it is what it is, right? Like it's hard to control everything in our kids' lives. And so beating ourselves up about the 30 minutes they watched, like don't. You have other things to worry about, and you're remember that your relationship with your child is so much bigger than just this little aspect of this, right? Not and also not everything that your child has watches has to be educational. It can be entertaining too. And using those moments, if you can, to co-view, to extend, to engage in that.
I think Dr. Van Dam is frozen for me. Hopefully she'll pop back on in just a minute. Julia, is she frozen for you too?
Yep.
Okay. Well, hopefully, oh,
Oh,
there you
I think
are.
she's back. She's
Hi,
back.
Okay.
sorry about that.
That's okay.
All I said was, sometimes you need 30 minutes to make dinner, or your child needs some time to decompress, and that's okay.
I love it. I mean, I appreciate your general your whole affect about this. It feels empowering, reassuring. It is really hard being a parent. We have a lot of questions, so I want to just ask you one that I was considering myself, and then I'm going to jump into some of the audience questions. But so for me, I'm like always wondering. What's better, phones, TV? Often I'll just like grab the phone out of my kids' hands and say, like, watch TV instead. So I'm curious to hear from you. Are some screens better than others? Is there like a hierarchy of screens, whether they're smaller or larger? And then also just talking a little bit more about like, what does it mean to have the TV on in the background versus sitting down to intentionally watch a show or hand somebody a tablet or a phone? Are some of these better or more harmful than others?
Yeah, so let me just preface by saying like I don't think the question is like are some better or worse. What the literature suggests is that there are differences in so when I hear like phone versus let's say it's a TV, I'm conceptualizing it more as like what they would be doing on a phone versus like what they would be doing on a TV. So like if it's being on an app or playing a game versus like watching a show, that's kind of how I am not aware of specifically like the size of the device actually mattering. I think it's more about kind of like what they're doing on that, and what the literature is suggesting is that interactive versus kind of, some people call it passive, but actually some media researchers argue that it's not actually passive. They want people to start calling it receptive, because what's happening is different areas of the brain are being kind of lit up or used in order to engage with these, right? So interactive media requires kids to, right, like be involved, be part of it, be doing something. Whereas passive slash receptive is they're watching and kind of absorbing that information. And I think so that what the literature suggests is it's not like which is worse, it's just that they're different and that kids are using different areas of the brain to engage in those things, right? I think at the end of the day, what it's suggesting is that, and the literature highlights this too, there's also this thing called co-use. So it's not just co-viewing, it's co-use. So if you can, again, turn those moments when kids are on them into something that you're sharing a connection moment with, like if they are playing a game, asking them about the game, or sometimes kids might come to you for help. I know, like, if my daughter was playing a game, every now and then she'll be like, I need help getting to this whatever place in the game, right? And so I think it's remembering that you can use these moments to expand connection and to really help support your relationship too.
I love that. If there's one thing I'm taking away from this whole this whole Zoom is this idea of co-viewing and that interaction between your child. I really love that. I want to answer this or ask you this question that came from somebody over in the chat. Can you discuss the differences, if any, of allowing young children to watch real people on the screen versus animation or cartoons? So thinking about Sesame Street versus versus Daniel Tiger.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, off the top of my head, I'm not aware. I don't know very well the literature on like specifically that like people versus characters. I mean, I think the literature that is sticking out to me is this idea of that socially meaningful. So if a character is meaningful to them, then they're better able to learn from that, whatever the character is trying to teach than someone who's not. I mean, I think also it depends on the age of the child, right? Because I think the age of the child also and where they are developmentally helps them to, they have different understandings of what's real and what's not real. And so I think this also hits on this idea that like, right, like little babies that they can't transfer anything because they don't know, right? Like what's on the screen is they can't differentiate that.
Got it. Helpful.
And actually, I did want to hit, sorry, on the last question about background TV that you had mentioned. There is literature that suggests associations between background TV and some of those kind of negative developmental outcomes. And it's associations, and what they're suggesting, right, is the mechanism for that is because that background TV is a distraction and it takes away from both the quality and quantity of interactions that parents are having or caregivers, whoever it is, are having with children. And there is research that has found that when background TV is on, parents aren't commenting or engaging as much, even if they are like playing and doing it in front of background TV. So it's not actually that different than have it. It's showing associations with kind of these effects because what it's doing is displacing. That's the theory in media
Mhm.
studies is like screens are displacing these positive things, right? When you're watching a screen, you're not reading, you're not playing, you're not touching things, exploring, interacting with the world around you. And young children in particular, they need to explore and learn about the world around them by experiencing it, not by watching it on TV.
Yeah. Well, I'm sad to hear that, as I'm sure many parents on this call are too, but it absolutely makes sense. I think that is probably I can sort of guess the answer to this next question, but I think a lot of us have it, is one of the commenters in the chat asked, if my child uses TV as a distraction to eat or to go to the bathroom, is that bad? And maybe a better question is, how can we move away from that kind of a habit?
Yeah, so the AAP actually, as you mentioned earlier, what the literature suggests is that when kids are using screens to regulate in some way, shape, or form, what that means is they're not having the opportunity to exercise those skills of actually regulating themselves, right? Because it becomes an external regulator for them, which when kids are little, when babies are little and toddlers, they use our regulation skills. They look to us to co-regulate them, right? And as they get older, they learn how to do those things on their own because they've been modeled by us as their caregivers on how to do that. And so when kids don't have the opportunity, right, the mechanism is that when screens are used, they don't have the opportunity to do those things on their own, to learn, to sit with those emotions, to learn what some potential other options could be when I'm experiencing something, right? And same is true with regards to like eating in particular, right? Like, how many times have you turned on a show and you're like snacking on something and then you look down and you're like, wait, did I just eat that whole, bowl of popcorn or whatever, right? These distractions, they make it hard for us to be attuned to our own experiences because we're distracted, we're watching something. And so that's what the literature suggests that, kids need these experiences. Kids need to have the opportunities to do these things. And screens, again, are displacing those opportunities.
Building on that, I love this question too, and I think there's two questions here that we can answer at the same time. When my child seems entranced, does that indicate that he or she is really into the content and that's great, absorption, or maybe that they're overloaded and when they're too entranced, we should take the cue that we should pull back. And then kind of the second question is what happens when we pull back and we say no and we create boundaries and I think a lot of people can attest to after they've had their kid on the screen for a half an hour, an hour, there's difficulty separating. Is that normal? And how can we work on separating our kids from the device?
Okay, sorry, twofold. So the first question was about being entranced and like if your kid looks like they're really engaged, what does that mean? I think on the surface, it's hard to tell to be like good, bad, because we don't know what they're taking in. I think if what they're watching, the content of what they're watching seems really flashy and moving fast, maybe it's suggesting they're more entranced. If the content is more trying to, teach at a developmentally appropriate pace, maybe they're actually thinking and engaged, right? Like, it's hard to just say, like, if you see them like this, do this. I don't think anything is in parenting is like that cut and dry necessarily, aside from safety, right? Like, I think that's the only area. And so, I think it's hard to tell. So, I guess in that case, I would anchor myself in those three C's, really trying to understand like what are they watching, kind of where are they? Is this something that's appropriate for their age, for their abilities, for their personality? Like if it's something that's really engaging that they really care about, like if my kid loves space and this is a show about space, it could be that they're just so engaged and they love space. You can't know just by looking at them. Um, and now I'm trying to remember the
Oh,
other.
how do we separate them from the screen?
Oh, how do you separate them from the screen? So I think this is more parent preference, parenting advice. And so I'm going to try not to just like give that advice because I think it depends on who your child is and how they're actually responding. But what I can say is that just like in relationships, that consistent boundary, whatever it may be, holding that boundary consistently helps them to understand and to learn, right? If today they can watch 5 shows and tomorrow they can only watch one without any explanation, that's probably going to lead to a meltdown, right? And so I think just remembering that if we're holding our boundaries somewhat consistently, kids are going to pick up on that and they're going to use that to predict kind of what's going to happen next. And I think little kids really thrive on that predictability and those routines because when we don't know what's coming, even as adults, we feel a little threatened. Like that unknown is really scary. And so I think this is just an example for kids. Like it's when they can predict and expect things to happen, it makes them feel better and it's easier for them to know like what's coming next. And in those instances, at least for my child, I've noticed like when she knows what's coming next, the battle is far less significant if she knows.
Yeah, and it makes me think of what you answered earlier of being able to implement screens as part of a routine. And your child gets 2 shows and then she knows it's over. Or those sorts of things I think were really helpful advice versus, haphazard watching and then they don't really know what's coming next, similar to like you said, like parenting.
And I will say, right, like we have our routine and parents can decide for themselves what their routine is. But like when we travel, our routine's out the window. Like any other parent, like when we travel, if it's a long travel day and she has her tablet or her iPad or whatever, I'm just trying to get where I need to go with the least amount of pushback as possible. And so I do other things, like I do bring other activities, but if that's the one she wants to go to, then I don't argue with it. But what I will say is every time we come back from a trip, vacation is ending, and that means that we're going back. We're not going to be watching our tablet all the time. We're going to go back to our routine. Like that's what I tell her, just because my parenting philosophy is giving her more information and letting her to prep her so she knows what's coming. And I just know for her personality, for the kid that she is, that information's helpful for her. For your kid, they might not care, they might not want the information, but that's how my kid is.
Yeah. And it comes back, like you said, to the 3 C's of knowing your child. So I know we have a couple of questions in here about YouTube, which is probably also a great time. I would love for you to answer, is YouTube bad? Which I think every parent is like, please say no, please say no. And then also maybe you can talk for a minute, and Julia can hop on just to talk about maca because it is a pretty interesting kind of answer to that question. But also just share with us your thoughts on YouTube because most of us are probably using it with our little ones, and how we can at least make lemonade out of lemons.
Sure. So you're gonna hate this answer. It's not cut and dry, right? YouTube was not created for kids. It wasn't from the outset, it was not created for kids. And at the same time, I can't say that everything on YouTube is horrible or everything on YouTube is great. Again, we have to use our the information that we have. So what on YouTube specifically? What is your child watching? Who is your child? How old are they? Right? Like I hate to say it that way, but rooting it back into that, there's not this blanket kind of this is bad, right? And so taking that information and being selective about kind of what you're putting on, because remember, you're putting it on. So you can make those choices. And yes, our kids, they might not like a decision that we make, but you're still in charge. You are still the parent. And I think sometimes parents, they feel, we don't like our kids to be upset or uncomfortable, but life, they're going to be upset and uncomfortable sometimes, and trying to find that balance of letting them experience those emotions and knowing how to work through them is going to be really helpful for them in the long run. So that's what I had to say about generally YouTube. I would say it was not created for kids. And even YouTube Kids, I feel like there are some things that I've seen on there that I don't necessarily think are appropriate for my child. And so we have to make those decisions as parents. We have to be the ones to decide what we're putting on for our kids, right? So, right, like what we've seen is like Sesame has literature that suggests it's positive. Sesame's on YouTube, right? So I think it depends.
That's helpful. And I know, Julia, you just put an interesting article in that I read, I think this past weekend in the Times about AI generated content and where it can go awry, even in kids programming. So definitely, I think a lot of parents' anxieties are warranted about YouTube. And then also, like you said, there are some really valuable things on YouTube the same way that they would be anywhere else. Julia, do you want to hop in for a minute and just share a little bit about maca and God?
Yes, we can keep this very brief. So Maca's differentiator is really that it's all rooted in child development science. So what that means and how we built it, the founders spent 2 years in rigorous research and development at the Yale Child Studies Center and collaborated with senior clinicians there to develop our proprietary child development framework, Maca Imprint. So Maca Imprint then is the lens that we use to evaluate all children's content across the internet. And that lens kind of allows us to not only see that content is age appropriate and safe. And as Jess mentioned, there are no ads or autoplay or kind of like addictive algorithms, as we call them within Maca Kids, but also that content actually supports child development. So a lot of the concepts that Kristen has spoken about here today, kids are, looking for characters to model certain behaviors around, sharing or healthy habits. That's the kind of content that you'll see on Maca Kids. We are starting with an iOS app releasing later this spring, but there's really easy ability if you're a parent like me who doesn't allow as many devices in the home and is typically allowing your child to watch TV. There's a really easy way within the app to cast to any smart TV. So we're really excited and hope to see all of you on our website. I'll drop in a link here. It's macakids.com. And if you guys have any questions or feedback whatsoever, I'll also drop my email address in here. Happy to filter those up to Kristen. And we love hearing from parents. We really built Maca just after hearing from parents how stressful the screen time problem is and how it's sort of the problem of our generation. I think I certainly feel that as a parent of a 3 and a 4-year-old. world. It just seems like screens and tech are everywhere. So we're just trying to, instead of providing judgment or more guidelines, really just provide the tools that make it a little bit easier for parents.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And again, feel free to check it out. Kristen, I'm going to just end with one question for you. And I really want to thank everybody for sticking with us. I know that the AAP guidelines or guidance talks a lot about modeling as one of the pieces of advice in terms of healthy screen time. And I think I want to kind of just end with this idea of like, here we are, grown-ups, doing the very things that we hope our children do not do. How can we be more intentional about our own device use, our own phone use, and really, set the example that we want our children to see?
Yeah, so actually the research is definitely exploring this more, and what it finds is that parents who have heavy device use, what you see is actually kids who are vying for attention, right? They're competing with a phone for their parents' attention. And there's a term that's called technoference in the literature. That's essentially the technology is getting in between, right? Like parents and kids. And I think it's important to balance that with also, like I said earlier, that technology and our devices can actually be a resource for us too. So trying to find that middle ground of being present, engaging with our kids, and having those positively beneficial, developmentally supportive moments is important. But again, we're living in a world where screens are everywhere. Like it's hard. It's hard for me. It's hard for me to put down my phone. And I try my best to be conscious of it. And I can see it in my kids when they are interested in my phone. And I remind myself it's because I'm interested in my phone, right? That modeling piece. So I try my best to stay present. Obviously, it doesn't always happen, and none of us are perfect. Like, I mean, I use my phone and that's what happens, but I try to be conscious of it. And when I realize that I'm on it, I'm like, okay, I need to put this down. I need to put this away. And I actually like to hide it. Like if I have it not on my person, it's easier for me to not engage with it. So I'll just leave it at
Perfect. So, everybody lose your phones, please. In all honesty, I do want to say thank you so much for joining us today. There was so much rich information in this webinar. I feel like I'm taking home a few gems to try in my own house. I hope that everybody else is too. If you have more questions that we didn't get to, and I'm so sorry that we just didn't have enough time, please feel free to respond to the email that you're going to get as a follow-up, and I will make sure that they get in front of Kristen, or you can email Julia. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you all at the next Vivi event. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.